The orbital auction house floated in the darkness of space like a massive crystal palace. Inside, aliens from across the galaxy had gathered for the weekly salvage sale. Jake Morrison stood near the back, trying to ignore the stares. Being human at these auctions always drew attention. Most species considered humans to be decent mechanics and brave explorers, but terrible business people. Too emotional. Too impulsive. Too willing to see value in things that had none. Today, Jake was about to prove them right. The auctioneer was a chulati, a species that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a businessman. His translator box crackled as he gestured toward the item on the platform with one of his forearms. Next item. Lot number 743. Unidentified safe. Origin, predecessor vessel. Condition, severely corroded. Contents, unknown. Starting bid, 500 credits. The safe was enormous, easily 2 meters on each side. But calling it a safe seemed generous. It looked like someone had dragged a metal cube through acid, then left it at the bottom of an ocean for a few centuries. The surface was so pitted and corroded that the original color was impossible to determine. Patches of rust, oxidation, and unidentifiable gunk covered every surface. Jake had spent 6 hours examining it during the preview period the day before. 6 hours that his crew said proved he needed a vacation. 500, called out a Viridian trader, more out of obligation than interest. 600, countered a Krati merchant. The bidding continued half-heartedly. Most of the serious buyers were saving their credits for later lots. A corroded safe from a predecessor ship sounded exciting until you realized the predecessors had vanished millions of years ago. Anything inside would be dust, if the safe even opened at all. Around Jake, aliens whispered in their native languages. Their translators picked up enough for him to catch the general meaning. Waste of time. Garbage. Why do they even bother auctioning this junk? The bid reached 2,000 credits and stalled. The Viridian trader dropped out. The Krati merchant shook his head, his face tentacles waving in a gesture of dismissal. 2,000 going once, the auctioneer announced, sounding bored. Jake raised his paddle. 3,000. The room's ambient noise dropped noticeably. Several aliens turned to look at him. A human was actually bidding? On that? 3,000 to the human, the auctioneer said, mandibles clicking in what might have been amusement. Any advance on 3,000? A ripple of chittering laughter spread through the crowd. Someone's translator broadcast loud enough for Jake to hear, the human thinks he found treasure. 5,000, Jake said, raising his paddle again. Now the laughter was open and unrestrained. A group of Chulati merchants activated their holographic displays, probably starting a betting pool on human stupidity. Jake had worked the salvage routes long enough to recognize the signs. 8,000, he called out, before the auctioneer could even ask. His communicator buzzed. A message from his crew chief, Tommy Blake, watching the auction from their usual bar on Station Meridian. Boss, what are you doing? That thing is trash. Jake silenced the communicator. He kept his eyes on the safe, remembering what he'd found yesterday during those 6 hours of examination. While other preview attendees had glanced at the safe and moved on, Jake had brought his portable analysis kit. He'd run spectral scans, magnetic resonance imaging, even chemical composition tests. The corrosion was real. Centuries of oxidation, no question. But underneath, in places where he'd carefully cleaned away tiny patches of buildup, he'd found something else. Patterns. Not random pitting from age and exposure. Deliberate scoring, microscopic and precise. Mathematical sequences carved into the metal itself. The Fibonacci spiral along one edge, so small he'd needed magnification to see it. Prime numbers arranged in sequence along another. The golden ratio calculated to 15 decimal places. Someone had put those there intentionally. Someone who wanted future finders to know this safe was more than it appeared. 10,000, Jake said firmly. The auctioneer's mandibles spread wide, the alien equivalent of a grin. 10,000 credits for lot 743. Surely someone else sees the value. More laughter. A Viridian near the front made an exaggerated show of scanning the safe with his equipment, then shaking his head sadly at Jake, as if pitying a child who believed in fairy tales. 12,000, Jake counted his own bid. That stopped the laughter. Now the aliens looked genuinely concerned. Was the human having some kind of mental breakdown? His communicator exploded with messages from his crew. 3 separate people asked if he'd been drugged. 15,000 credits, Jake said, his final offer. The auction house fell silent. 15,000 credits was serious money. Jake made about 16,000 a month coordinating salvage operations on Station Meridian. He'd just bid nearly his entire monthly salary on a corroded box that everyone in the galaxy considered worthless. The auctioneer let the silence stretch, giving anyone a chance to counter. Nobody did. Why would they? The human had clearly lost his mind. Sold to the human for 15,000 credits. Lot 743. Please proceed to payment processing. As Jake walked toward the payment terminal, he heard the whispers following him. In a dozen languages, aliens speculated about human psychology, the effects of prolonged space travel on their brains, whether Earth's education system adequately covered basic economics. One conversation, between two Chulati traders, was particularly loud. Their translator broadcast clearly, "I've always said humans are impulsive. They see junk and imagine treasure. It's why they make poor merchants but decent scrap collectors. No ability to assess actual value." Jake smiled to himself as he pressed his thumb to the payment scanner, authorizing the credit transfer. Let them think what they wanted. He'd learned something important in his 15 years working the galactic salvage routes, dealing with species from across the known universe. Every alien civilization, despite their vast differences, shared one common trait: they were really good at ignoring things that didn't fit their expectations. Humans had a different trait. They were really good at looking at garbage and asking, "But what if?" That curiosity had sent humans to space when their technology barely qualified as safe. It had driven them to establish contact with alien species despite having nothing to offer but enthusiasm and terrible coffee. It had made them the galaxy's most persistent explorers, because humans simply couldn't accept that anything was truly unknowable. As the safe was loaded onto a transport drone for delivery to his workshop, Jake's communicator buzzed again. "Tommy, his crew chief, boss, please tell me you have a plan." Jake typed back, "I have a plan." "What is it?" "Find out what's inside." "That's not a plan. That's just curiosity." Jake grinned as he typed his response. "For humans, that's the same thing." The transport drone delivered the safe to Jake's workshop at 3 in the morning. The workshop was really just a converted cargo bay on Station Meridian's lower ring, but Jake had spent 5 years turning it into a proper restoration facility. He had chemical baths, sonic cleaners, precision tools, and enough scanning equipment to make a research laboratory jealous. His crew had left messages saying they'd help in the morning. Jake sent back a simple response: "Thanks, but I've got this one." He needed to work alone. Not because he didn't trust his crew, but because he needed to focus without someone asking every 5 minutes if he'd lost his mind. The safe sat in the middle of his workshop floor like a challenge. Under the bright work lights, it looked even worse than it had at the auction house. The corrosion went deep, creating layers of oxidation that had fused with the original metal. Whatever this thing was made of, it wasn't any alloy in the standard galactic database. Jake started with the gentlest approach, using a soft brush and mild solvent to clean a small test area. The corrosion resisted, clinging stubbornly to the metal beneath. He switched to a stronger chemical treatment, applying it carefully with a cotton swab to a section no bigger than his thumbnail. Hours passed. The station's day cycle came and went outside his workshop windows. Jake barely noticed. By the end of the first week, he'd cleaned roughly 5% of the safe surface. His crew stopped by occasionally, watching through the observation window. They'd wave, he'd wave back, and they'd leave shaking their heads. Word spread through Station Meridian. The human who'd bought the corroded safe was actually trying to restore it. The aliens found this hilarious. A Chulati merchant started a betting pool with 3 categories: how long until Jake gave up, how much money he'd waste on the project, and what excuse he'd use when he finally admitted defeat. The Krati trade delegation sent him a gift basket. Jake opened it to find various medications, each bottle helpfully labeled with human-compatible dosing instructions for stress, anxiety, and delusional thinking. The attached card read, "For when you accept reality. With sympathy." Jake put the basket on a shelf and went back to work. The second week brought better progress. He developed a custom electrolytic bath that could remove corrosion without damaging the underlying metal structure. The process was slow, requiring him to treat small sections at a time, but it worked. Patterns emerged as the corrosion fell away. Mathematical sequences, just as he'd found during his initial examination. But there were more of them than he'd realized. The Fibonacci spiral connected to a series of prime numbers. The prime numbers led to calculations of pi that went on for hundreds of digits. Everything interconnected, creating a web of mathematical relationships across the safe's entire surface. This wasn't just decoration. It was a map. All coordinates. or instructions for something. By the third week, Jake had stopped leaving his workshop except for food and bathroom breaks. He slept on a cot in the corner, catching 3 or 4 hours when exhaustion finally forced him to rest. His crew left meals outside the door, along with increasingly worried messages. Tommy came by in person on day 19. Jake let him in, mainly because Tommy had brought real coffee instead of the station's synthetic substitute. "You look terrible," Tommy said, handing over the coffee. "Thanks. You're a real morale booster." "I'm serious, boss. When's the last time you showered?" Jake thought about it. "Thursday? It's Monday. Then Thursday." Tommy walked around the safe, examining Jake's progress. About 60% of the surface was now clean, revealing metal that shimmered with an odd iridescence under the work lights. The mathematical patterns covered every visible inch. "Okay, I'll admit it," Tommy said. "This is pretty weird. What do you think it means?" "No idea yet. But it means something. Nobody carves this kind of detail into a safe for decoration. Maybe the predecessors just really liked math. Maybe. Or maybe it's a lock." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "A lock made of math problems." Tommy came by in person on day 19. Jake let him in, mainly because Tommy had brought real coffee instead of the station's synthetic substitute. "You look terrible," Tommy said, handing over the coffee. "Thanks. You're a real morale booster." "I'm serious, boss. When's the last time you showered?" Jake thought about it. "Thursday? It's Monday. Then Thursday." Tommy walked around the safe, examining Jake's progress. About 60% of the surface was now clean, revealing metal that shimmered with an odd iridescence under the work lights. The mathematical patterns covered every visible inch. "Okay, I'll admit it," Tommy said. "This is pretty weird. What do you think it means?" "No idea yet. But it means something. Nobody carves this kind of detail into a safe for decoration. Maybe the predecessors just really liked math. Maybe. Or maybe it's a lock." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "A lock made of math problems. Why not? If you wanted to protect something for millions of years, you wouldn't use a mechanical lock. Mechanical parts degrade. Electronics fail. But mathematics? Mathematical truths are eternal. The Fibonacci sequence is the same now as it was when the predecessors built this thing." Tommy sipped his coffee, considering. "So you think solving these equations will open it?" "I think it's worth finding out." On day 22, Jake cleaned the last section of corroded surface from what he determined was the safe's front face. As the final patches of oxidation fell away, he found what he'd been searching for. A crystal. No bigger than his thumbnail, embedded flush with the metal surface. It was perfectly clear, like a diamond, but it pulsed with a faint internal light that seemed to breathe, growing brighter and dimmer in a steady rhythm. Jake reached out and touched it. The world exploded into light and symbols. Not external light. This came from inside his head, projected directly into his visual cortex by technology he couldn't begin to understand. Mathematical formulas flooded his vision, layering over reality like a heads-up display. Equations. Theorems. Proofs. Problems waiting to be solved. Jake stumbled backward, blinking, but the symbols remained. They weren't dependent on his eyes being open. They were simply there, in his mind, waiting. His hands shaking slightly, he grabbed a data pad and started writing down what he saw. The first equation was simple, basic calculus he'd learned in high school. He solved it quickly, inputting the answer on the pad. The symbols shifted. The solved equation faded, replaced by a new one. Slightly harder. Differential equations. Jake solved it. The symbols shifted again. This was it. The lock. A test that required not strength or technology, but understanding. For the next 72 hours, Jake didn't sleep. He worked through the problems with every computational aid he could access, cross-referencing databases, running simulations, checking and rechecking his work. The equations grew progressively harder, moving from undergraduate mathematics to graduate-level theory to cutting-edge problems that existed at the boundaries of known science. Several times he got stuck and had to consult the station's academic community. He framed his questions carefully, asking about abstract mathematical concepts without revealing why he needed the answers. The alien scholars were amused by his sudden interest. One elderly Viridian professor gave him a patronizing lecture about how humans should focus on practical skills rather than theoretical mathematics. Jake thanked him politely and used the professor's explanation to crack the next problem. On the fourth day, exhausted beyond measure, Jake entered the solution to the final equation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the safe surface rippled. The metal moved like water, flowing and reshaping itself. The corroded exterior that had taken him weeks to clean simply fell away, dropping to the workshop floor in a pile of metallic dust. Beneath lay pristine metal of a type that made his scanner scream with confused readings. A seam traced the outline of a door, glowing faintly with that same internal light as the crystal. The door whispered open on ancient mechanisms that still functioned perfectly after countless millennia. Inside, suspended in a glowing stasis field, floated a key. But this wasn't just any key. It was made of exotic matter that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously, shifting between solid and liquid and something else entirely. Looking at it hurt Jake's eyes, as if his brain couldn't quite process what it was seeing. And etched into its surface in clear galactic script was a single word: treasury. Jake heard shouting outside his workshop. His crew had been watching through the observation window. They'd seen the safe open. Within minutes, every alarm on the station would trigger. Every security force would mobilize. Every alien government representative would demand answers. But for this one perfect moment, Jake just stood there, staring at the key, feeling the weight of what he'd found. The aliens had laughed at him for buying a corroded safe. They weren't laughing anymore. Jake reached into the stasis field carefully, half expecting an alarm or defense system to activate. His fingers passed through the shimmering energy barrier without resistance, and he grasped the key. The moment his skin made contact, the exotic matter solidified, becoming something his hand could actually hold. It was warm. Not hot, just pleasantly warm, like holding a cup of coffee on a cold morning. The key pulsed once in his grip, and the interior of the safe came alive with light. Holographic projections erupted from the open door, filling Jake's entire workshop with three-dimensional displays. Maps. Charts. Star systems he'd never seen before. The projections expanded outward, passing through his workbenches and tools, creating a glowing maze of information that stretched from floor to ceiling. Through the observation window, Jake could see his crew pressing against the glass, mouths hanging open. Tommy was frantically taking pictures with his communicator. Lisa Hayes, his best navigator, had her face practically smashed against the window, her eyes wide. Jake turned slowly, trying to take it all in. The main projection showed a massive three-dimensional map of the galaxy. But not the outer regions where most civilizations lived. This map focused on the galactic core, that deadly region at the center where gravity and radiation reached such extreme levels that no known species had successfully navigated deeper than the outer fringes. The core was considered a death trap. Black holes clustered together like grapes on a vine. Radiation storms that could strip a ship's hull in seconds. Gravitational forces that could tear metal apart at the molecular level. Every species had probes that had tried to explore deeper. None had returned. But this map showed pathways through it all. Safe routes, marked in glowing blue lines, weaving through the deadly maze like veins through flesh. The pathways twisted and turned, avoiding the worst hazards, threading through narrow corridors of relatively stable space. And at the very center, deep within the core where no ship had ever gone, was a marker. A destination point highlighted in brilliant gold. Jake walked closer to the projection, reaching out to touch the golden marker. The display responded to his movement, zooming in and expanding the detail. His breath caught in his throat. It was a structure. Massive didn't begin to describe it. The scale indicators on the hologram made Jake's head spin. The thing was the size of a small moon, a perfect sphere of the same unknown metal the safe was made from, hidden in a pocket of artificially stabilized spacetime. A predecessor vault. Text scrolled beside the image in galactic standard script. Jake read it twice to make sure he understood correctly. The vault contained predecessor technology, medical knowledge, energy sources, and complete historical databanks. Everything the ancient civilization had learned before they disappeared millions of years ago. The inventory list began scrolling. It went on for minutes. Then hours. Jake stood there watching items flow past, each one representing technology or knowledge that would revolutionize some aspect of galactic civilization. Cures for diseases that had plagued entire species for generations. Energy systems that could power whole sectors. Transportation technology that made current jump gates look primitive. And buried in the middle of the list, almost casual in its presentation, complete records of predecessor history, culture, philosophy, and science. The answers to every question scholars had been asking since the first ancient ruins were discovered. The observation window behind Jake shattered. Not literally, but his crew had finally given up on watching and burst through the door. Tommy, Lisa, and 6 others crowded into the workshop, staring at the holographic displays with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief. "Boss," Tommy whispered. "Is that what I think it is?" "Depends. What do you think it is?" "A predecessor vault. In the galactic core. With enough treasure to buy the entire known galaxy twice over." "Then yes, that's exactly what it is." Lisa moved closer to the map, her navigator's eye immediately tracing the pathways. "These routes, if this data is accurate, it's showing safe passage through the core. Places where the radiation is shielded, where the gravitational forces are stable. This is impossible. The core is supposed to be completely impassable." "Apparently the predecessors didn't think so," Jake said. His communicator started buzzing. Then everyone's communicators started buzzing. Then the workshop's main communication panel lit up with incoming priority messages. The word had gotten out. Within 30 minutes, Jake's workshop was surrounded. Not by his crew, but by security forces from half a dozen different species. Chula-T merchant collective enforcers in their polished armor. Krati trade officials with legal documents already prepared. Viridian Empire warships had actually deployed and were holding position just outside the station's defense perimeter. The station's chief administrator, a nervous Chula-T named Victor, appeared on Jake's communication screen. Behind him, Jake could see representatives from multiple governments all shouting at once. "Mr. Morrison, we need to discuss the artifact you've acquired," Victor said, his mandibles twitching with stress. "It's not an artifact. It's a legally purchased safe. With predecessor contents. The merchant collective is claiming salvage rights supersede auction purchases. The Trade Confederation says all predecessor artifacts fall under cultural heritage treaties. The Empire is threatening military seizure." Through his workshop windows, Jake could see armed aliens taking up positions. This was escalating fast. Tommy leaned close and whispered, "Boss, what's the play here? We can't fight off 3 governments." Jake looked at the key in his hand, then at the holographic map still glowing in his workshop, then at his crew gathered around him. 8 humans who'd worked with him for years, who'd laughed at him for buying the safe but still brought him coffee and meals while he'd worked on it. And he thought about the galaxy outside. Hundreds of species, thousands of worlds, all competing for resources and territory and profit. All so focused on ownership and control that they'd forgotten what discovery was supposed to be about. He made a decision that would either mark him as the smartest human in the galaxy or the stupidest. "Get me a connection to the galactic news networks," Jake said. "All of them. I want everyone watching." "Boss, that's insane," Lisa protested. "The second you broadcast what you found, every government in the galaxy will have a claim to it." "Exactly," Jake said, smiling. 20 minutes later, with cameras from 50 different news organizations pointed at his workshop and an estimated audience of 2 trillion beings across known space, Jake stood in front of the holographic displays and told the galaxy everything. He showed them the safe, the key, the map, the vault, the inventory. All of it. He held nothing back. The alien governments watching went berserk. Their carefully planned legal strategies meant nothing if the information was public knowledge. Then Jake made his offer. "I'm going to lead an expedition to the galactic core to open this vault," he announced. "And I'm accepting volunteers from any species. You don't need money or connections or government approval. You just need one thing. You have to actually want to go for the discovery itself, not for profit." The response was immediate and predictable. Alien commentators called him naive. Government officials declared him mentally incompetent. Economic analysts calculated the trillions of credits in potential value he was throwing away. But Jake saw something the aliens missed. He saw his own crew stepping forward without hesitation, volunteering before he'd even finished speaking. He saw the messages flooding in from other humans across the station, across the sector, offering to join. Because humans understood something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten somewhere in their millions of years of civilization. Some things were worth doing just because they were worth doing. The predecessors didn't hide this vault for one species or one government, Jake said to the cameras. They hid it for explorers. For people who still remember that the universe is full of wonders, and sometimes the point isn't profit. Sometimes the point is just finding out what's out there. He held up the key, letting it catch the light. "So who's ready to explore?" Retry SF. 3 months after Jake's broadcast, the expedition ship Persistence sat in the orbital dock undergoing final preparations. The name had been chosen by crew vote, and it surprised absolutely no one. If there was one thing humans were known for across the galaxy, it was their stubborn refusal to give up on anything. The ship itself was a modified deep space explorer, reinforced with every protective system Jake's budget could afford. Triple-layered radiation shielding. Gravitational stabilizers. Emergency power cores. Structural reinforcement that made the ship look more like a tank than a vessel meant for exploration. They were going to need every bit of it. Jake stood in the cargo bay, checking supply manifests for the 100th time. Food, water, spare parts, medical supplies. Everything they'd need for a journey that most experts predicted would end in disaster within the first week. The betting pools had shifted from mocking Jake to calculating survival odds. Current consensus, 3% chance they'd make it to the galactic core. Less than 1% they'd make it back. Captain Morrison, we've got another volunteer. Jake looked up to see Tommy approaching with a Chulati in tow. Not just any Chulati, but an elderly female with graying chitin and optical sensors that had faded from bright blue to pale cyan with age. I'm Tessa, she said, her translator rendering her voice as warm and grandmotherly. I've published 17 papers on predecessor civilization. My own species called them a waste of time. I'd like to volunteer. Jake studied her. You understand this is dangerous? We might not come back. Young human, I'm 240 years old. I've spent my entire career studying the predecessors while my people mocked me for not focusing on profitable ventures. If I die seeing their vault with my own eyes, I'll die happier than living another 100 years in a commerce office. Jake smiled and shook her hand. Well, shook her foremost limb. Welcome aboard, Tessa. She wasn't the only alien volunteer. Over the past 3 months, others had trickled in. Not the ones Jake expected. Not wealthy merchants or government officials or military personnel. Instead, he got the misfits. The dreamers. The ones who'd never quite fit into their own cultures. There was Ryan, a young Krati who'd been rejected by his people's military for asking too many questions. Kelly was a Viridian who'd chosen scientific research over the mandatory military service, making her an outcast in her warrior culture. 3 more aliens, each with similar stories of being dismissed by their own species for caring about the wrong things. And humans. Dozens of humans had volunteered. Jake had to turn most away simply because the persistence didn't have room. He'd chosen carefully, selecting the best engineers, navigators, scientists, and medical personnel he could find. The final crew numbered 37. 12 aliens, 25 humans. Everyone knew the risks. Everyone came anyway. Launch day arrived with less fanfare than Jake expected. The galactic news networks had mostly moved on to other stories. The governments that had threatened legal action seemed content to let the crazy human and his crew of misfits fly off to their deaths. Only Station Meridian turned out in force. Thousands of residents crowded the observation decks to watch the Persistence detach from its dock. Some came to witness history. Others came to say goodbye to friends they'd never see again. Jake stood on the bridge, watching the station fall away through the viewport. Lisa sat at the navigation console, her fingers dancing across holographic controls. Tommy monitored the engineering systems. Around them, the rest of the crew worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. All systems green, Tommy reported. Radiation shielding at maximum. Power core stable. We're ready. Lisa, set course for the galactic core. Follow the predecessor map exactly. Aye, Captain. Engaging jump drive in 3, 2, 1. The stars stretched into lines as the Persistence jumped to faster-than-light travel. The journey had begun. The first week went smoothly. Too smoothly. The crew almost started to relax, thinking maybe the warnings about the galactic core had been exaggerated. Then they hit the outer boundary. The ship's alarm screamed to life at 0300 hours, jerking Jake from sleep. He ran to the bridge in his sleep clothes, arriving to find Lisa wrestling with the navigation controls and Tommy frantically rerouting power to the shields. Through the viewport, space itself looked wrong. Twisted. Streams of radiation visible to the naked eye arced through the darkness like lightning frozen in time. Stars bent around invisible gravitational wells, their light smearing across the void. Radiation storm, Lisa shouted over the alarms. Came out of nowhere. Shields are holding but we're already at 60% capacity. Jake pulled up the predecessor map on his command console. The safe route showed a narrow corridor weaving between radiation streams. There. 5 degrees starboard. Thread through that gap. That gap is barely wider than the ship. Then we'd better not hit the sides. Do it. Lisa's hands moved with precision born from 20 years of navigation experience. The Persistence banked hard, sliding sideways through space, slipping between walls of deadly radiation that would have cooked them all in seconds. They made it through with meters to spare. It was the first of many close calls. The journey into the core became a grinding test of endurance. Every day brought new hazards. Gravitational eddies that threatened to tear the ship apart, creating tidal forces that made the hull groan and buckle. Dark matter clouds that disrupted their sensors. Spatial anomalies that made navigation nearly impossible. They lost one of the backup power cores on day 12 when a gravitational wave hit without warning. The core's containment failed, forcing an emergency shutdown and venting to prevent a catastrophic explosion. On day 18, a radiation burst overwhelmed their shields for 7 seconds. 7 seconds of exposure that left 3 crew members with radiation poisoning requiring immediate medical treatment. The crew worked in rotating shifts, grabbing sleep when they could, always on alert for the next crisis. Jake found himself surviving on coffee and adrenaline, catching maybe 4 hours of sleep each day. But something unexpected happened as the days wore on. The crew, human and alien alike, started working together with a synchronization that surprised everyone. Tessa's knowledge of predecessor technology helped them interpret subtle warnings in the map. Ryan's questioning nature led him to discover patterns in the gravitational disturbances that let them predict some hazards before they hit. Kelly's scientific training helped them jury-rig repairs using materials in ways the manuals said were impossible. And the humans kept everyone's spirits up with terrible jokes, worse coffee, and an absolutely unshakable belief that they were going to make it. On day 37, Jake found Tessa in the observation lounge, staring out at the twisted hellscape of the deep core. He sat beside her, offering a cup of the station's infamous synthetic coffee. She took it politely, though her species didn't actually drink liquids. "You know what I've learned on this journey?" she asked. "Why humans are different." "Why's that?" "Other species see obstacles and calculate whether success is worth the cost. Humans see obstacles and get stubborn. You don't make the universe make sense. You just refuse to let it stop you." Jake smiled. "Is that a compliment?" "I think so. I'm still deciding." On day 43, the Persistence rounded a gravitational anomaly the size of a solar system, and Lisa called out, "Captain, I've got something on sensors. Matching the vault coordinates exactly." Jake moved to her station, looking at the readings. There, in a pocket of impossibly stable space surrounded by chaos, hung the vault. A perfect sphere kilometers in diameter. Ancient machinery still humming with power after millions of years. Exactly where the predecessor map said it would be. The crew gathered on the bridge, staring at it in silence. They'd actually made it. The Persistence approached the vault slowly, carefully, as if sudden movements might wake something that had been sleeping for millions of years. Jake stood on the bridge, the predecessor key clutched in his hand, watching the massive sphere grow larger in the viewport. Up close, the structure was even more impressive. The metal surface was perfectly smooth, unmarked by the radiation and gravitational forces that should have torn it apart eons ago. Ancient machinery ringed the sphere, geometric shapes that hummed with energy, creating the pocket of stable space that protected the vault from the chaos surrounding it. "Life support readings are stable in the immediate area," Tommy reported from the engineering station. "Whatever that machinery is doing, it's creating a safe zone about 5 kilometers in diameter." "Any defense systems?" Jake asked. "None that I can detect. But then again, my scanners barely work out here. We could be looking at a weapons platform and I wouldn't know until it started shooting." Jake smiled despite himself. "That's reassuring, Tommy. Really boosting morale here." Lisa guided the ship closer, matching velocity with the vault's lazy rotation. As they drew alongside, a section of the sphere's surface began to glow, highlighting an area about the size of their ship. "I think it knows we're here," Lisa said quietly. Jake made his way to the airlock, suiting up in his environmental gear. Tommy, Tessa, Ryan, and Kelly joined him. The rest of the crew would stay aboard the Persistence, monitoring systems and ready to pull them back if anything went wrong. The short journey across the void to the vault surface felt longer than the entire trip through the galactic core. Jake kept expecting alarms, weapons, some kind of automated defense. The predecessors had hidden their greatest treasure in the most dangerous place in the galaxy. Surely they'd protected it somehow. But nothing happened. They landed on the glowing section of hull without incident. Jake approached with the key, searching for some kind of receptor or lock mechanism. For a moment, he couldn't find anything. The surface remained perfectly smooth. Then the key pulsed warm in his hand, and the metal beneath his feet responded. A section of the hull simply liquefied, flowing aside to reveal a receptor that rose from the surface like a flower blooming. Jake placed the key into the receptor. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Jake had a brief, terrifying thought that maybe they'd come all this way for nothing. Maybe the key was meant for a different vault. Maybe the map had been wrong. Then the entire sphere began to open. The surface retracted in sections, peeling back like the petals of a massive flower. Layer after layer revealed itself, each one containing chambers, corridors, entire sections of preserved predecessor civilization. Laboratories with equipment still waiting to be used. Libraries with data crystals arranged in perfect rows. Museums displaying artifacts from a culture that had vanished before most current species had even evolved. All of it in perfect condition, as if the predecessors had simply stepped out yesterday. Jake's communicator crackled with voices from the persistence. His crew was watching the vault open, seeing the impossible preservation, trying to process the sheer scale of what they'd found. The team moved inside, following corridors that lit up as they walked, responding to their presence with technology that seemed almost magical. Everything was sized for beings roughly the same height as humans, which struck Jake as odd. The predecessors remained mysterious, with no confirmed images or remains ever found. Yet they'd built their spaces to accommodate creatures like the ones walking through them now. They found the central chamber an hour into their exploration. It was massive, a spherical room at the heart of the vault with holographic projectors embedded in every surface. The moment Jake stepped inside, the projectors activated. A figure materialized in the center of the room. Tall, bipedal, with features that seemed to shift and change, as if the hologram was showing different versions of the same being. Sometimes it looked almost human. Sometimes it resembled a Chulati. Sometimes a Krati or Viridian. "If you have opened this vault," the figure said, its voice translated simultaneously into every language through technology that made modern universal translators look like toys, "then you have proven yourself worthy of our inheritance." The crew stood frozen, listening to a message from beings millions of years dead. "Not through strength, or cunning, or wealth," the predecessor continued. "But through the one quality we valued above all others, the desire to understand." The hologram shifted, showing images of ancient civilizations rising and falling. Not just the predecessors, but others before them, stretching back billions of years in an unbroken chain. "We were not the first," the predecessor explained. "We were created by those who came before, who were themselves created by others, back to the universe's beginning. Each civilization rises, learns, and eventually moves beyond the physical. We are the latest to make that transition. You will not be the last." The hologram showed the vault's contents in detail. Everything the inventory had promised was real. Technology that could revolutionize civilization. Medical knowledge that could save billions of lives. Energy systems that could power entire galactic arms. And most precious of all, the complete knowledge of how the predecessors had transcended physical existence, moving on to something greater. But then came the warning. "This knowledge can only be used by those who seek it for the right reasons," the predecessor said. "Those who come for profit will never solve the puzzle to reach this place. Those who come through violence will find defenses they cannot overcome. Only those who come seeking understanding for its own sake can access our inheritance." Jake understood then. The corroded safe, the mathematical puzzles, the deadly journey through the galactic core. It had all been a test. Not of intelligence or strength, but of character. Of whether whoever found the vault cared more about discovery than profit. The hologram faded, leaving them in the silent chamber with a choice to make. Tommy spoke first. "Boss, this is it. Everything we could ever want. We could take this back and Earth would become the most powerful planet in the galaxy." "We could," Jake agreed. "Or we could do something different." Over the next several hours, Jake discussed options with his crew via communicator. The humans understood immediately what he was suggesting. The alien crew members took longer to grasp it, but eventually they all agreed. When the Persistence returned to civilized space 2 months later, Jake called another press conference. The entire galaxy watched, expecting him to announce exclusive rights to the vault, to leverage his discovery for power and wealth. Instead, he opened it to everyone. Free access to any species, any individual, with one requirement. They had to approach it the way his crew had, with genuine curiosity and respect for the knowledge itself. Not for profit. Not for power. For understanding. The response was chaos. Alien governments demanded he reconsider. Economic councils calculated the trillions in lost revenue. Military advisors called him dangerously naive. But something unexpected happened. Scientists from across the galaxy began volunteering to make the journey. Teachers, researchers, the curious and the dreamers. People who'd spent their lives pursuing knowledge for its own sake. Within a year, the vault became what the predecessors had intended, a center of learning for the entire galaxy. Species that had competed for centuries found themselves working together, studying side by side, sharing discoveries. Technology from the vault revolutionized medicine, energy production, transportation. Ancient diseases were cured. Clean energy replaced polluting systems. Understanding of the universe deepened in ways that would have taken millennia to achieve alone. But the most profound change was simpler. The galaxy remembered how to wonder. How to explore not for profit, but for the joy of discovery. How to value knowledge for its own sake. And Jake Morrison, the human who'd bought a corroded safe and found the key to everything, quietly returned to Station Meridian and his salvage work. When reporters asked why he wasn't claiming fame or fortune, his answer became the most quoted phrase in galactic history. "I didn't do it for the treasure. I did it because I wanted to know what was inside." The aliens finally understood what made humans different. It wasn't persistence or adaptability or even courage. It was wonder. Simple, childlike curiosity that made someone willing to spend their life savings on corroded junk just to discover its secrets. And in a galaxy that had grown cynical and calculating over millions of years, that sense of wonder was the most valuable treasure anyone could share. The predecessors had left their inheritance to whoever proved worthy of it. They'd never specified what species that would be. But they'd clearly hoped it would be someone who still remembered that the universe was full of mysteries, and sometimes the point wasn't what you gained from solving them. Sometimes the point was just finding out. Retry. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.